Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Slaybaugh, and I serve as the Communications and Connections Coordinator for the Sierra Pacific Synod. And today, we're really excited to welcome our Sister Synod, the South Dakota Synod, and the Sierra Pacific Synod together for a live stream conversation. We have both bishops from the synods joining us live, and they will be talking through a few things together casually, and then they would love to answer some live questions from the audience. So we encourage wherever you're watching us from, whether that be Facebook or YouTube, to leave your comments or your questions in the comments, and we'll pull them up on the screen, and the bishops will be able to respond to you live. So with that being said, I'm going to bring our two bishops. Hi, bishops, welcome in.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Would you both like to introduce yourselves?
Absolutely. I am Megan Rohrer, or as my grandmother calls me, the Reverend Dr. Megan Rohrer, Bishop of the Sierra Pacific Synod, and we are here at my alma mater, Augustana University, inside the Synod office.
I'm Constanze Hagmaier, Bishop of the South Dakota Synod, and the Synod office is right here at the beautiful Augustana Lutheran campus. So we're glad to welcome Bishop Rohrer here and share some time.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think is wonderful about us having a Sister Synod relationship, which, by the way, if you didn't know that we were Sister Synods, that's fine. I didn't know we were Sister Synods.
We learned that.
Yes. So we're in the process, I think, of like figuring out what that means, because there was no rule book or playbook or manual about how to do it. Some of the things that I might propose that it means is that we are synods that have a diversity of folk. Our idea of what urban ministry might be slightly different on the amount of traffic and the amount of snow that might happen in different regions. And there might be different colloquialisms and disagreements about what justifies salad. For example, if cookie can go in salad.
Sure. Cookie salads qualify.
Yeah. The people back in California, Nevada.
No, not so much.
They feel like just leaves in salads.
Well, apple. Sort of.
Yeah. But it's more than just the food. One of the things that I think is maybe not expected when people think of the Sierra Pacific Synod, if they think about it at all, they might think of places like Fresno or San Francisco, maybe even Reno, Nevada, places that are more well-known or urban. But we have large portions of our synod that are very rural, a different type of agriculture. We have wine making, we have almond trees, some corn, you can find the sweet smell of hay in some parts of our synod, not the same. But we have congregations that are struggling with how to afford a pastor because they're in such a remote location that even if it might be a better idea to close, they don't want to close because they might have to drive 30 to 100 miles before they can find another Lutheran congregation. Or maybe their congregation is one that is acceptive of a diversity of people, but the neighboring Lutheran congregation is less. And so they don't want to close because they want every member of their family to be able to join them in church. And so I think we share some of the need to figure out how to creatively fund some of those congregations, how to encourage people who might prefer to be at the Nugget in Reno than in Clark, South Dakota, to consider pastoring places that are places where Jesus shows up and where love is possible, but maybe less fun in the social life. Like the town might close at 5 p.m.
Yeah. Unless you live on Pierre, then you can have an hour longer when you go to Fort Pierre.
Because of the time change, right?
Because of the time change.
That's a time change joke, you guys.
Yeah.
What are some of the creative things that you all have done in the past or are experimenting with in terms of how to either encourage pastors to go to more diverse places or to help congregations be able to afford a pastor when it's hard?
Yeah. So we have several ways. So for congregations, what we do is we actually have what we would call a world strategy table. But instead of us organizing them, we kind of wait for the congregations to come together naturally, organically. So it's not this top-down approach. Philosophy always is, how can we best accompany congregations and what God calls them to do. And an exciting piece that we do have, and I think it's especially for first call, is the scholarship funds for seminary debt reduction, which is a grant that will help eliminate and alleviate any of the seminary debt. That has brought great attention to the Synod. That doesn't mean that you really love world ministry, right? It helps you pay your bills, basically. I think some ways of how we creatively partner is to talk with the seminaries and think about ways how we can utilize internship to get a foretaste of the feast to come, what world ministry is like, right? So to think creatively, and especially with our ecumenical partners. So we have partnerships with the Episcopal Church, our Methodist partners, of how these internship or Synod authorized ministry sites can actually work for all of us. And with some of the big shifts of celebrating how we welcome all people, of all backgrounds, I think our partners, especially in the Methodist Church right now, are looking at these kind of partnerships where how can we be truly welcoming and celebrate that partnership. So those are a few creative ways to give people at least a taste. In my personal story, that's how I got to love South Dakota, because I'm not originally from South Dakota. Keep telling people when I start speaking that they can stop taking bets, because it's not Minnesota or North Dakota. It's really all German in my accent. So the love I developed for world ministry was that I got to dip my toes in the water, literally, as an exchange student, and just experienced the welcome that I think is really unique for us here, and especially in these world communities. When we first immigrated, my family and I had no clue what Crisco was, because I don't do Crisco. So the women at that rural church had given me a kitchen shower. So we came with the baby and a few suitcases and nothing else. So they had furnished the parsonage, furnished the kitchen, and everything was new because I lived on metric. And I was afraid of even turning on the stove because nothing would work anymore, right? And so these women kind of ushered me in, the women of the ELCA, and I found this great can in the pantry that had cookies on it. And I had people come to the house, and I thought, oh, I can serve them cookies. And I know how to make coffee. I figured that out meanwhile. And I opened it up, and there was all this white fluff in there, right? And I stuffed it quick in the fridge, not knowing what it was. But it was actually through the non-judgmental spirit of these women that just kind of ushered me into loving South Dakota. It's besides having a beautiful landscape where heaven kisses earth in some sort of a way, there's also this spirit. And I think you can only experience it by emerging into it and building trusted relationships to expand our own limited vision that we oftentimes bring.
Yeah, and I think growing up in South Dakota, there are some like secrets that maybe folk from California, Nevada might not know, because on paper things might look more conservative than they are, right? So in South Dakota, I went to 4-H and I learned how to sew, and I learned how to cook, and I learned how to hunt, and I learned how to do all of those things. But on paper, it looks like, right, because there's a club called Future Homemakers of America. It looks like that when the women of the ELCA are like coming together, that it's like to make you into this, Betty Crocker kind of person.
Oh, yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. Like, God bless all the people who are able to take that on as their roles. But what you end up discovering is that the women of the ELCA were doing this really radical thing at a time when people weren't sure if they could be pastors.
Yeah.
People weren't sure if they could vote in congregations. Women weren't allowed to have their own checkbooks. It had to be in their husband's name, and only their husband could sign, even if it was joint money. And they made clubs and found ways that they could collect special offerings together and choose where they wanted their money to go through the church. And so it was this radical way of giving themselves agency, electing their own leadership, doing their own Bible study, because if only the men get to be pastors, we're going to do the Bible study ourselves. And I think there is something really beautiful that happens in a South Dakota church kitchen, which is that most of the women in that space, on our best days, not our hypocritical days, because we have those too, that people are rooting for each other. The mom who's in tears because she can't take the kids crying anymore gets to like have people to vent it out to, and gets to have someone who teaches her how to make the pie, or makes the pie for her because she just needs a nap in the corner. And so there's
show up with the tater tot casserole.
Yeah, there's just a way that people are rooting for each other. And literally, because so many folk in this area are depression survivors, that when there is a need, they'll go, oh yeah, I got one of those. I saved it for when someone would need it. Yeah. We keep
Cool
the
Whip
string
containers
and the Cool Whip, all of it. And we have a bookshelf in the basement with all the tin cans in case the neighbor needs cranberries or whatever. And we're willing to share them around. And so on paper, it looks like you get paid less. Be paid in like half of a hog in your freezer.
Oh, I had the whole food pantry truck in my first call come up and bring diapers, a whole truckload full of diapers. I think I had diapers for until the kid would be 10, right?
Yeah.
But it was just amazing. There's just this generous spirit, and these women, as you say, there's quite a resilience, and kind of a sneaky resilience that they actually celebrate. In the church basement. We have to remember, they were on the forefront of women ordination. They had social justice, Bible study material, and out before this was even a hot topic. Right, so it's just amazing. These women, I think, fly below the radar oftentimes and get niched, and I think they actually don't mind being niched, because that draws the attention to something else, and they get to do this radical work, which is really great.
And they can leave the like hair whitening stuff in too long to on purpose make their hair blue, but no one's gonna ask them about it because
the purple haired ladies.
Yeah, because everybody assumes it's a mistake, and they're really just more radical than people expected. And so I think that's part of what internship time could be as a learning for people. But you spoke about something before that I think is really critical, that a lot of people don't know about, that ends up being a part of the salary battle with how pastors are picked. There was this period of time for, let's say, people, boomers and older, where seminary was practically free. Cost like $100 a year or something like that, including your room and board. And then there's this period of time in the middle where it was outrageously expensive, like in the hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. And now several of the seminaries have sold property and banded together, and for many people, seminary is practically free again. But there is this chunk of people in the middle for whom that contractual need to figure out their living wage needs to include either their seminary debt or creative ways for synods to figure it out. And so that's where I think there's a lot that we can learn. We've started in our candidacy committee trying to think about ways that we could, particularly because we're trying to lift up racially diverse leaders in our synod. And so we're finding ways so that if a Black woman who maybe is LGBTQ is going to do internship, that we get them a mentor, and that the synod and the seminary together and some congregations fund that internship site, rather than only looking at the internship sites that can afford to pay the salary of that intern, with the hope of giving people role models that help them express what is unique and is their gift, rather than it feeling like a hazing, that everyone's journey doesn't have to be this same for congregations, but it can be about, well, if God called you to be you, what would it look like if we made the money possible for your full embodiment to be more welcome and open in our congregation, so that you start your training in a position of strength. And then you can go into your first call and not already defeated,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And so to try to inspire that boldness. So that's a thing that we're kind of starting to experiment with in our candidacy time.
We have a couple of those where we underwrite as the South Dakota Synod some of the internship for congregations that couldn't experience even that kind of diversity, even to have an intern. You know, there's oftentimes this, well, all the big churches, especially in South Dakota, where everything is around Sioux Falls or Rapid City, and then maybe a little bit Aberdeen and Watertown. And then the rest is like wide open country. So 75% of our congregations are East River, and then other one West River. But most of it, I would say, probably 90% is really rural. And there's sometimes the perception that they get overlooked or not, and so we have made a commitment to accompany them and give them some, or have some of these opportunities that with walking alongside of them that they can have, especially interns and congregations, because I think there is something where these congregations, when I come visit, actually say, we helped train a pastor. And that's just kind of this, woohoo, we did it.
Yeah, little baby pastors getting toddler legs to like, figure out how to do it.
And they're so forgiving. I remember not knowing anything about rural ministry or being a pastor. And they were, in my role, just really forgiving. And I most of the time joke. I learned everything I need to know about leadership, either through parenting or through rural ministry, where you get to do everything. I mean, there isn't just this niche that you are in. You get to do it all, from unplugging the toilet to serving coffee at the funeral to actually preaching the funeral sermon, right? You get to do it all. So that's the joy. It's really diverse in some other way of diverseness.
Well, and also in South Dakota, there are 7 different Native tribes, right? And independent nations. So you're also an ambassador to these different communities that are within your geography. We are just, I think, starting our journey in the Sierra Pacific Synod to try to reach out to our Native siblings and to find out ways that we can be ambassadors and care for creation together. What are some of the things that you all have been done? Because the relationship is a lot longer here.
Yeah. So we have 2 active ministry sites. One is on the Pine Ridge Reservation. It's the Pine Ridge Reconciliation Center. And then we have something that we truly think is unique, where it's a true Dakota and Lutheran congregation worshiping community in Rapid City, Wauyoton Lutheran. And then we're just starting, with the help of our churchwide partner, to explore ministry options with Standing Rock through McLaughlin, through the congregation, which is also kind of a beautiful story on its own. But it's a tight walk, because it's always this remembering that we're working with a nation, with a sovereign nation. But this sovereign nation in our civil communities operate under the same rules, right? So a practical implication would be you're buying insurance, right? And how do you, I always think about it, growing up in Europe, there's all these sovereign nations around me, right? And they all have their own passports, they have all their own jurisdiction, they have all their own ways of doing things. And here we're having a sovereign nation in a nation, and we like in the civil communities to just sometimes bulldoze our way into this independent nation. And as a church, to hold that space, I think the gift that we have, the church have, is we can hold that space. It's hard work, because you need to learn both languages. It's kind of a dual language thing. But if you enter it with that curiosity and knowing that you will mess up for sure, and that in Christ we're forgiven, right? You can just start right back over. But holding that space and being an advocate or an ally is really a big piece, because the dominant cultures has a tendency to just swallow it up very easily. And that's what we're experiencing. And to always check ourselves over is, are we holding that space, or are we dominantly bulldozing through?
Yeah, because there's been a lot of moments where bulldozing has happened. And I think about this a lot because the 1,100 acre farm that my mom and my stepdad live on is in Pipestone.
Oh,
It's some of the most sacred land
Yeah.
ever for Native folk. And so may they live forever and may they outspend everything that they have. But if someday the land is inherited, then what does that mean to be an owner of that land, or to have genealogical ownership of that land? And so I think there's a part of the, like, you know, the Greek word of forgiveness has something to do with unloosing and untying ourselves from things, like the trying to take stock of what we have done and what we have left undone at the same time that we keep trying to do something in the world. And so it's lovely to have the kind of both and of, you know, the mission work that is the very real food, poverty, education support that Lakota and Dakota folk need, and the self pastoring rather than imposed, like, here's the Christianity that we need, because we also know that there's a long legacy of that being so supremacist and damaging for that community.
Not helpful.
Yeah.
From my Lakota partner in Woyton, to even as Vicar Jonathan speaks with his people, to even have the name of Jesus not be heard as something punishing. As you know, as simple as that sounds for us, it's huge work that's going to be undertaken. Yeah, it's a privilege. I mean, it's one of the great honors to be able to walk along and to learn. Somehow, I think I'm uniquely positioned to get a deeper insight of how to live and bridge when there's especially some collective guilt, right? I always say I'm glad to be a Lutheran, because I know I'm guilty the moment I open my eyes, but I'm not stuck there. I don't have to be stuck in that story, because that's not where it ends. That's actually where it begins, because there's a whole new world of new life out there, right? And because of my German past, I bring this collective history of a really dark chapter with, and growing up in a divided Germany, witnessing the fall, you know, having family that actively lived through that dark time of the Second World War, and sharing in that story and sitting at the same table. And I think there is some value to open conversations that don't have to be centered around guilt and shame, but around, and that's so Vicar Jonathan Oldhurst and I made the commitment to each other when we had our first meeting after my election, to just be these bridge builders where these cultures can meet and where it's safe, because you want to be safe when you admit that you did wrong, whether it's you personally or you collectively. That takes a big step to admit, and you want to be safe, and shame is not the right way to go about that. So to work creating that space together is really sacred ground, and it's just a beautiful piece that we hope we can deepen and make happen.
Yeah. Well, and I hope that you will share learnings with us as we begin this work, and also poke us a little if we don't do the work.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, be accountability partners if we don't do it.
Yeah. So, you know, Pine Ridge and the Reconciliation Center has that immersion program, which we, right now, it's not possible due to the pandemic. But once that opens, feel free to bring groups for their immersion. And I always joke, this is not the kind where you get to eat Indian fry bread and then you get to tour Mount Rushmore. This is the real stuff where you hear the stories and you walk the sacred grounds.
Living with people and eating with people and going in the circle, the conversation for sure. Yeah. Well, what do you think it means that we're Sister Synods?
I'm glad we explored it. We kind of both don't have a clue. We learned about it, which is kind of fun. And I think the beauty about it is that we get to explore what it means together.
Yeah.
So we're planning trips to California, for example.
Yeah.
But
who out there wants Bishop to come and visit the kind of agriculture you have now? Kirchhoff Winery. I'm talking to you.
Yeah. I'd love to stomp some grapes. But, you said earlier that we have the agricultural community in common. It was fun to hear what is actually growing on the land compared to here. And, I have never had that deep exposure into California. I probably just had the tourist, exposure. So that will be fun to learn more and share some partnership on what resources can we share, where can we learn from each other, as our territory is similar. We do have the same matters of congregations. How can we afford a pastor? We're so rural. Will there ever be somebody coming out here? Right? People might picture California as all this wild, exciting place, but then we just learned that there is far and in between spaces. So I think there can be some exchange, there can be some conversations, there can be some shared learning. It will be fun to get some of our farmers together and kind of share about what does that mean to be a rural congregation in California. Maybe they can adopt each other and form some deeper partnerships.
Yeah, I love the idea of taking you to Elko, Nevada, where the crickets are so large that you can't get them off your windshield with just one car wash.
Wow.
There's other beautiful parts about it, don't worry.
Okay, well, we have smelly insects when you drive.
Mosquitoes.
Yeah, they don't smell good when they're dead on your car. I don't know how we got there. It's kind of weird, but it's good.
You get to learn more about the plagues.
That's right, the plagues. Oh, well, there we go. Nice,
there you go.
Nice transition. Yeah, I can see you had experience with that.
No, I think it would be fun to have you all come and see what you can see. I also feel like South Dakota has been a place of like experimenting with what kind of, like, I feel like South Dakota Synod has created new words for pastors just because they just started doing things before it was approved. Like associates in ministry, I feel like comes from this area of like, we just had some lay people and they just kept preaching. So we wrote them down on our list.
Yep. The whole Synod authorized ministry piece. And it's so funny because it ties back to my own story again, where during the wars, World War I and World War II, the women filled the pulpit, right? Because the men were out to war. And after the First World War, the women kind of retreated back into their assigned spot while they learned. They're not disappearing in the Second World War. They weren't disappearing. And so when I first came here and people that weren't used to seeing women clergy addressing me as, what, are you a pastor? It took me by surprise, but it's such a great opportunity to just wonder and walk about, but now we're beyond that. Now we're just growing in more ways than one. And let's explore what that means, right? So there's some freedom in being creative and try things and explore things, and some work and some don't, and that's okay too. That's right. I still love being a Lutheran, right?
Yeah.
Some things work and they don't. You don't get hung up on it.
Well, that's an attitude I would like to export to California and Nevada. Sometimes our people get hung up on it.
Oh.
I think in California or in South Dakota, because the person you disagree with most is most likely to be the person who encounters you when you're stuck in the ditch in the blizzard. That sometimes, or at least it used to be, might not still be this way, you could have extreme opposite political beliefs and still be best friends because you told each other the truth about it. And I think we still are working with how to have civil conversations in the midst of giant disagreements, how to still be a community, because in a small town, that's all the people you got.
Well, you got only those people, and
Yeah.
you disagree with them, you're gonna have to, there aren't many more open seats at the ball game.
Yeah.
If it's sold out, it's sold out, and you gotta sit next to them.
So there's something I think to be said about learning to live in community regardless of the beliefs that happen.
You just have to make it work in that way. And I mean, it's true for South Dakota, that's hard oftentimes. But because it's so limited who you have, and you know, once you're bound to the land, you're not just gonna uproot your family and move somewhere else and pick your blocks and go somewhere else. You just need to find ways to live who you authentically are. Otherwise, not healthy if it happens otherwise.
Yeah. Well, Catherine, what do you think? Are there other things we should be thinking about, or other questions we should be thinking about? Can't hear you. I wonder if you're on mute.
There we go.
Yay.
Thanks for sharing. I just wanted to say we've been receiving lots of positive remarks from different people. People are really excited for this conversation. Someone said, yay on the better internship options.
We need to partner on internship options.
I know some really great towns. You got any interns that want to go to like San Francisco?
Well, don't promote it on Facebook. Otherwise, I'm losing all my interns.
We can send them back. Oh, that's right. You're going to send them to like Custer.
Oh, well, that will be a nice spot.
Right?
Like we send them like really remote.
Really far out there.
Like far out there.
Yeah.
We did get a question about what individual congregations can do to be of assistance to Pine Ridge.
All right. Well, financially is usually the best way. I know people always like a project, and they receive everything from health kits to bicycles to quilts. We had to be a little careful with some of the quilts. There was a stop of importing, and this is part of, you know, we mean well, it's part of who we are. But then there was the whole big piece of the smallpox, and that came back, right? That communal history came back, and there was a stop on that part. So the safest and best way to support Pine Ridge is to send your monetary contributions, and we can probably make that happen through our end to send you the information. They do have a very active kids program where there's meals that's going to be shared. We are recipient of a homeless grant currently to work with our Episcopal. So on Pine Ridge, we work actually with our Episcopal partners as well with the Dakota Presbytery. And together we share in this reconciliation ministry. And any type of financial assistance is greatly appreciated as we work with our partners on combating homelessness, you know, to keep people warm and even in a building. It's huge.
Yeah. The building structures that are on some of the reservations in South Dakota would not even pass as building structures in other spaces. And in part because donations they got were shoddy, and in part because people get tricked, and in part because funding comes and then disappears, and so it's imagine if you gave farmers land that wasn't even nutrient rich enough to grow grass because you wanted them to die off and not be able to grow their own food. And some of the same reasons that the soil is poor for farming makes it poor for foundations and for other things like that. And so it's just a very difficult space. The roads on the way there are difficult. The roads on the way out are difficult. And there were a lot of intentional things set up to try to make it fail, to try to make education be hard, and healthcare hard, and voting hard, and all the things hard. Yeah.
there's all these hurdles, and to be able to build that trust, to say whenever we come, we give a word, the promise that we're making, we need to make sure we carry through.
Mm-hmm.
So partnerships that will take much longer to establish, and your personal accountability, that's always a big piece, is a part of making it happen.
Mm-hmm.
There were way too many pieces of paper signed in history that were not upheld.
Mm-hmm.
That one's personal word, you need to make sure that it's actually happening
Mm-hmm.
all the way.
Mm-hmm.
We currently actually work on a project on Pine Ridge. Well, Pine Ridge, with the boarding school survivors, then our Native relatives have come to the Reconciliation Center and said, can we collaborate on bringing healing and wholeness to the people, to the survivors? And instead of, this is an example, instead of saying, okay, here's a whole bunch of Lutheran social services, white counselors who will help you talk through it, the first question was, what will be helpful in your world? Mm-hmm. So if you like to, there was the question, how do you support? That's the newest project, is standing with those who survived the trauma of the boarding schools. Mm-hmm. And we're supporting it financially, but then having the survivors choose options that actually are working in their world to bring healing. And that mm-hmm. looks oftentimes much different. Mm-hmm. On the Rapid City site, to have even 2 sweat lodges, downtown Rapid City, find insurance, but that's the piece. It seems in that big campus that they have, just a small piece. But when one says we help you find that insurance, that's a big piece. It might be just insurance in our world, but for our relatives there, it's part of how they celebrate their Lutheran identity. Mm-hmm. It's just when a world congregations ask me, well, how do I acquire an LBW mm-hmm. or an ELW or with one voice or the new hymnal, mm-hmm. right? There's ways how we can make that happen. And we're used to congregations asking that question, but I don't know how many would ever ask, can you help us get a sweat lodge in our parking lot? So these kind of partnerships to just explore, what is it that you need to live out your identity, to not always come in and say, oh, we know what you need.
Yeah. Well, so what I'm going to say is that your quilts and your kits might be useful if you follow the guidelines that are from that community. But even if you give out of guilt or shame or doubt, your check still cashes.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And if you send it to the South Dakota Synod,
we'll direct it right
they
there,
have
100%.
Programs that need the funds and are projects that are requested mm-hmm. from the community. Mm-hmm. So send your cash in paper or electronic form,
any
right?
way, shape, and form. We take credit cards.
There you go.
There was another question kind of going off of that. If there is a specific group of South Dakota Synod, ELCA congregations or leaders that are kind of coordinating these efforts and this help. And mm-hmm. if there are, if you could share a bit about that.
Yep. So Pastor Dan Johnson is the contact in Pine Ridge. And Nicholas is the youth coordinator. We work in partnership with Pastor Asa Wilson from the Dakota Presbytery. And then if our Episcopal partner, the connection there would be Bishop Jonathan Folds from the diocese. But the direct partner for us, for the ELCA, to coordinate if you have questions or you want to know anything, you want to reach out to Pastor Daniel Johnson. That's your contact. That's it. That's the man. And then Vicar Jonathan Oldhorse would be your contact at Woyton. If you're ever in Rapid, that's where you want to go.
Well, I think Maria's in Chamberlain.
Okay. Well, Maria, you want to talk to Pastor Dan Johnson. Hagmaier Reconciliation Center.
Yeah. I will also add, you can send donations to the Sierra Pacific Synod earmarked for Pine Ridge Reservation. We'll just send them to your synod.
Very good.
And we'll just.
That's what it means to be a Sister Synod. We can transfer funds.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
We have a line item for all of our other Sister Synods, and I'm going to go
go.
back this afternoon, and I'm going to call and ask that we get an earmark for the South Dakota Synod.
Yeah. If there aren't any other questions, I have a question that came up over
Yeah,
lunch,
do
right?
it.
Was the one about what do you do with the holy closures and some of the creative ways that we have heard some things are happening.
Yeah, so in the Sierra Pacific Synod, we have a policy about what we do with holy closures. When a congregation hasn't figured out what they want to do with their land or with their property, when that property becomes synodical property after a closure, we have a process that we follow, and it states that the very first thing we do is we look into that property's ability to be a new mission start. If it is able to be used as a new mission start, that's what we do. And so we have 11 mission starts currently, and Pastor Tita is in charge of those and does a really awesome job. And so we do demographic work, not only about the demographics of where that community is, but where that community is expected to be statistically in the next 10 years. And then identify if there is a group of people from that community who's interested in doing that work. And then we let that community lift up a leader. And then we send that person to seminary. And we train them to be the pastor of that community that has been identified that we want to support. And part of our ability to do that is because property in California and Nevada is worth a lot. And so when a building is identified that can't be used for mission, we sell it, and the money goes into an account, and we spend 5 to 10% of the interest of that account, and it goes into our mission funding. So when we partner that with all of the mission support we get from the ELCA, we're able to grow lots of different things. We also use that fund to pay 100% of our DEM salary.
Wow. Nice.
Yeah. So
that's for us to learn.
Yeah, but we don't have a way to like pay off our seminary student loan debt yet. We'll have to figure that out. That'll have to be another bucket of money. But the good thing is that congregations who are nearing the end of their life get to choose, right? So they can choose to sell their property and donate it to all the mission stuff they love and choose what those things are. Mm-hmm. They can choose to work with Pastor Tita to identify the group that's going to grow. And while they're shrinking, this new thing is growing. Mm-hmm. They can choose to be an anchor church and work with a wealthier congregation that's going to outlast them, and they invest in a separate congregation, so it's not entangled with the same stuff, but the idea is that that congregation would inherit their building or whatever their assets are, or they can choose to just say, it's on the too hard pile. We've been secretaries and treasurers for too long. I want to retire. So we will let the synod be in charge of closing this place and thoughtfully resurrecting it or seeing what happens next. It takes a little bit more trust in the synod to do it that way. And that's why there's a full spectrum of options, from choose what you want to do with your assets to let someone else choose what you want to do with your assets. But the idea is that it's a sharing of gifts. And so the synod, contrary to popular belief, is not in the property collection business. Right? We're just trying to be sowers who fling seeds.
With the deck of cards of congregations, and
because that's the thing that we don't have, is a magic psychic predictor of which of these ministries we plant will be successful and which ones won't. And we don't even know what being successful is. Right?
Yeah.
Is
it looks so
talking
different.
About Jesus for 6 months and then folding success? Or not? Does it have to live 20 years? We don't know. Does it have to have big numbers? Does it have to be financially sustainable? I personally worked with the homeless for a very long time. I believe all people deserve pastors in every geography, and that part of the work of our church might be not figuring out how congregations exist into the future, but how do we change the economy so that we can have pastors in all of the places, regardless of if we have buildings in all the places or if we have traditional worship in all of the places. And how do we keep talking about Jesus as the world evolves and turns and shifts?
Reminds me a little bit of when I was in parish ministry, and my passion always was with food. So at one point I realized it's really not a shortage of food that we have.
Yeah.
It's a distribution problem. And how do we get the food distributed evenly so that all may be fed?
Yeah.
And the same is true for both of our rural places and urban places. How are we going to make sure Jesus is proclaimed in all the places, in all the ways that people's ears hear and hearts feel, right? Because that's a big part.
Yeah, and that's our conversation, is how do we diversify the income of spaces so that offering doesn't matter? Because if it doesn't matter, if the budget is not the issue, then you can worship with 5
That's
people.
right.
God shows up with only 2 or 3, right? If money is not the issue, then you can worship on top of a mountain, or you can worship at the bottom of the ocean. You can worship it. I mean, the communion is soggier at the bottom of the ocean, I imagine.
Yep.
But like,
the wafers won't stick to the roof of your mouth, or maybe they stick even worse.
I know, it's hard to know, but like, so that's what I think is part of the privilege and maybe the difficulty of our time, is how do we figure out the money stuff so that we don't have to figure out the money stuff? Like, how do we make Jesus the center instead of sorting the trash? How do we make Jesus the center instead of the water heater or whatever the other stuff is? And then we both also have synods where there's natural disasters.
Yep, we do.
So how do we think about Jesus in a tornado or after a tornado?
That's right. Well, we sit in the garage and watch it come. We talked about that.
That's my kind of people, yes. But we have half of our synod on fire right now with wildfires. We have a drought right now. We have the human-made disaster of gun violence in lots of spaces. And so we're thinking about ways we can train lay people to be chaplains who can respond to disasters and care for first responders, because we're not in a place where disasters are unexpected. And so we want to be people who can all show up and help, and think about expanding what we credential beyond just pastors and deacons. So maybe the folk who would show up at a school if a bad thing happened in a school, God forbid, or the people who hang out in hospitals. So how can we have vetting for coaches and all the different ways we have rostered lay leaders and lay evangelists, and how do we do background checks and all the paperwork and credential people? And it's hard, because the more paperwork you give yourself, the less traveling you get to do, and then the less you get to hand out bread. And so it's all the stuff we're working on. But I'm excited that we'll get to experiment with some of these things together and think about it more. And maybe some of our bad ideas can be good ideas here, and some of your bad ideas can be good ideas in our
and vice versa.
Yeah. And then
that'll be fun.
In the times in between, we'll drink wine and
coffee,
have some communion together, and be better just for learning from each other.
Yeah. Catherine's back on.
Yeah, we did it.
Well, we had lots of people that are excited for the connections. There's this comment about someone that's thinking moving back to South Dakota and just loves how connected the two synods are in so many different ways. I did want to raise up the fact, I think this is from someone in your synod.
Our Lutheran Plan generosity person, Kathy.
Go.
Kathy, long-term giving.
Yes, the gifts of stock shares and IRA distributions are also welcome. There's some comments about past prayer gatherings at the Chamberlain Community Garden.
Yeah, they have a good garden. Have you been to their garden?
No.
Out in Chamberlain?
Well,
you got to go hang out with them.
I better need to go out to Chamberlain.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she commented again about the helpful information. I know there's people that are just loving the connection, loving the conversation, people that want to spend time rewatching and just processing because of the great info, and lots of welcomes back to South Dakota for Bishop Megan. So thank you all. This conversation will be available afterwards if anyone is interested in rewatching. Maybe there were some helpful tips that the bishops shared. And I can assure you that this is just the start of a really wonderful partnership between the Sierra Pacific Synod and the South Dakota Synod. So
start praying for us, y'all. When you do that list of praying for bishops, just add us to the list.
Add us to the list.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, bishops, for being present with everyone today. And blessings on the rest of your day, everyone. Take care.
Take care.